Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be doing an old school deck profile, I suppose. Doing it on the old PokeGear.app developed by Jake Gearhart. Do please check out the website if you want to build your own decks. Today we're looking at a deck from the 2010 Worlds format, which is going to be Gardevoir Gengar. It's a deck I've been testing. I do have it proxied out, just kind of trying to figure out counts. In a way, it's a very dumb deck, but it also works. It does exactly what it needs to do. So today I'm going to be talking about my list, talking about counts, why I play them, and why we made the deck in the first place. So beginning with that, one of the things that I noticed while playing 2010 is that Gardevoir has a severe weakness to Gyarados, especially Gyarados variants playing Floatzel level X, which makes it essentially impossible to ever stop a Gyarados from coming back into the active spot and smacking you way harder than you'd like. And you just really can't deal with that as Gardevoir. If they get the Floatzel in play, you pretty much concede. So I was looking for ways to beat Gyarados. What beats Gyarados in 2010? Gengar does. The Curse Guard deck uses a combination of Item Lock and just general disruption to beat Gyarados. Just being really tricky, forcing them to do things they don't want to do. And just making it very uncomfortable. But also Gengar level X solves our Floatzel problem. So we'll talk about Gengar in a bit. Starting off, we have 3 copies of Tomb. I decided to go with 3. It's just the standard of the very heavy setup decks. I tried 4 because this deck does have the option to hit and run, but I didn't find it to be relevant. You can always Night Maintenance for a 4th one if need be. And because you're still mostly a Gardevoir deck, you're not too worried about starting the Spirit Tomb, or keeping the Trainer Lock, rather, the whole game. So not starting the Spirit Tomb is less of a big deal than it is in Curse Guard. It is obviously very good for its Keystone Seal that Trainer Locks both players and Darkness Grace to evolve your Pokemon for free. Primary guy you're going to be evolving is the Gardevoir line. You play 4 copies of the Ralt from Platinum. This is the best Ralt by far, because it's got the Future Sight, which rearranges the top 5 cards of either player's deck and puts them on the top in any order. It does also have a Hypnoblast attack. You're probably not using this attack. Mainly, if you start this Ralt, Future Sight is a really good free attack to just find you a card to not die in the next couple turns. So just look at the top 5. Hopefully you can find a supporter or an evolution, something like that, to get you back into the game. Do play this Ralt always. 3 copies of Kirlia from Platinum. Now, this is a bit unusual. I know most people do not play 3 copies of Kirlia. My justification with this deck is that we have a lot of cards that are eating up at our rare candies, and it just felt really good to be able to get all of the Guardy evolutions in play at any time just by having Kirlias on the bench. So I decided to run 3 copies just to have extra copies. If you want to go down to 2, though, that's perfectly fine. I just think it's a lot harder to be able to threaten these Gardevoir combos if you don't have the 3rd Kirlia, but I could see cutting this for a consistency piece, something like that. We have 2 copies of Gardevoir from Secret Wonders, of course the main attacker of the deck. I guess I should specify, always play this Kirlia, do not play the other Kirlia. This Kirlia, Teleportation Burst, great attack, Super Cycle, great attack. 2 copies of Gardevoir from Secret Wonders. Telepass, incredible power, allowing you to copy supporters from your opponent's discard pile. Just keeps you really consistent, makes it really rough on your opponent, because they have to limit what supporters they play if they want to not give you access to them. It's also got the broken Psychic Lock attack, turning off your opponent's Poke Powers during their turn. And while we do mainly rely on Psychic Lock, because we play other cards in this deck, we actually have all kinds of attacks we can use. But Psychic Lock is going to be the main attack. Gardevoir is going to be the main thing you want to get into play first, because Telepass helps set up your board. 1 copy of Gallade. Sonic Blade we do not use. What we do use, Psychic Cut. You may choose as many of your face-down prize cards as you like and put them face up. Does 60 plus 20 for each you do, but those cards remain face up. So you do have a damage half of 180, but obviously you can just get more prize information, which is good, and you can take out bigger threats. And this deck does deal with bigger threats a lot better than regular Gardevoir. Obviously, GGAMU can take out bigger threats, but you have to get that whole board set up. Whereas Gallade, it's always worth playing because you just have that instant ability of Psychic Cut. So, not that GGAMU doesn't play Gallade, but we also play Gallade. It's a good card. We also play 1 copy of Gardevoir from Platinum. It does have 10 more HP than the other Gardevoir. Very notable. It has the Psychic Connect Poke Power. We will be using this one a lot. As often as you like, you may move a Psychic Energy from one of your bench Pokemon to your active. Essentially, this just allows you to switch between your attackers. And one of the main things you'll notice is that this deck is able to switch between Trainer Lock and Power Lock, depending on what best fits the situation. And you're also able to just store energy to use multiple attackers with this. So I found this pretty good. You could swap this out for a third Telepass, but losing energy and going behind on attachment, this deck just feels bad. So I thought this was a pretty good inclusion. Also got 2 decent attacks. Energy Burst. You can stack energy to do 10 plus 20, or 20 plus 10 for each energy attached to Gardevoir and the defending Pokemon. It's almost like an X-Ball attack on Mewtwo EX. So you can just do a lot of damage. I've definitely finished games with this attack when playing GGAMU, so it's pretty good. And Psychic Protection does 60, and Gardevoir has no weakness. This is actually relevant, as this deck does not play the Adzelf that turns off Psychic Weakness, so Psychic Weakness is relevant. The reason it doesn't play that is because we have Gengar, which doesn't have Psychic Weakness. Moving on, we have Gardevoir level X. Gardevoir level X, nice HP buff there, or either 20 or 10, depending on which one you upgrade. So upgrade the 110 one, preferably. Teleportation Poke Power allows you to switch in and out of the active spot with your Gardevoir level X. It's not like a switch, it's like Gardevoir can move in and out of the active. You can't just switch anything in and out. So just pretty good power, allows you to have more mobility on your board, and in combination with Psychic Connect, you can move up a Pokemon to the active and then move energy to it. We also have Bring Down, a nice attack, 2 energy, choose a Pokemon with the fewest remaining HP in play, and that Pokemon is knocked out. So essentially you can just steal some prizes off your opponent if their board isn't prepared, and Gengar actually helps a lot with that. So the Gengar line does help make our Bring Down more effective, which is pretty good. Next up, we play 2 copies of Ghastly. Is the best Ghastly by far, because it's got that Pitch Dark that turns off your opponent's trainer cards for a free attack. One of the best starters of all time for a basic, like, evolving Pokemon. This is just insane. And Trick Gas isn't bad either. Doing 10 and switching, sometimes it may be your best play to save an energy so that you can threaten an attack later on versus discarding it. But turning off trainers is the main thing why we played this Ghastly. We play 1 copy of Haunter. This is Diamond and Pearl Haunter. We play this because of the free retreat. Hypnosis is also pretty solid. Defending Pokemon's now asleep. Dream Eater only works if they're asleep and does 60 damage, but you're usually not going to stick this. The sleep is just nice, and the free retreat is nice. I did have a game the other day that I did lose, but I was able to stick the opponent for 3 turns with sleep. Not enough to get a Dream Eater off, but just enough to put them to sleep during their turn, so they couldn't attack me or retreat, which was relevant if I would have drawn anything relevant. 1 copy of Gengar from Stormfront with the Fainting Spell. If Gengar be knocked out from damage from an attack, you may flip a coin. If heads, the defending Pokemon is knocked out. So this is a really good way to take out your opponent with your Gengar. Typically, Gengar's not going to be going down, at least easily, but because this guy is very frustrating to deal with. Got a lot of good attacks. 110 HP is not too bad. Shadow Room puts 3 damage cutters on one of your opponent's Pokemon, but puts 6 instead if they have a power. So really efficient attack for 1 energy. You can just get in there. If you're behind on energy and you just can't Psychic Lock yet, you can Shadow Room now and then retreat into Gardevoir and move the energy over with a Psychic Connect when you're ready to Psychic Lock. Poltergeist, not very good in this deck, but 30 times the amount of trainers in your opponent's hand. Trainer Sporters and Stadiums, as they're called in this format. So you can sometimes get something out of that, but usually you're not going to be using that. Shadow Room is our main point of focus here. You notice the deck doesn't play Dusknoir, so Shadow Room is our only access to the bench in a meaningful way, besides Bring Down. But you can Shadow Room Pokemon on the bench and then bring it down, so that is relevant to note. One really relevant thing about Gengar is its weakness to darkness. So unlike Gardevoir, which is weak to Psychic, which is a very common weakness, we have Gengar, which is weak to dark, a little bit more uncommon to see. So you can pivot between these weaknesses and make it a little bit more difficult for your opponent. Just watch out for Drift Blim FB, which snipes for Psychic weakness against Gardevoir and can snipe around your Gengar, so do be careful for that. Otherwise, it's nice to just have this differentiation. This is also a decent attacker into a lot of matchups, though because you only have 1 copy, you can't chain it in the same way that a Curse Scar deck would. We play 1 Curse Scar from Arceus, speaking of. 110 HP is pretty low for this guy, but don't worry, we can buff it. Curse, once during your turn, you can move a damage counter from one of your opponent's Pokemon to another. So just a good way to adjust damage around. In combination with the Shadow Room here, sorry, not Fainting Spell, Shadow Room, you can snipe 6 on a Pokemon, move the damage counter over from something else, and get 7, which knocks out a lot of the basic Pokemon in the format with powers like Uxie and Azelf, so that is very good. Just also, you can save math from KOs. Just gives Gardevoir some frustrating prowess too. I was reading an old article on, I believe, 6 Prizes by Jay Hornung, where he talked about playing Gardevoir with Kingdra at 2010 Worlds, and the extra 10 damage, he said, really surprised his opponent, put them in a tough spot when they weren't ready for it. So you can kind of do the same thing here in a little bit more of a roundabout way. It's not as good as just putting a 10 extra damage, but it's something. Shadow Skip, for 3 energy, does 60, 10 to your opponent's bench Pokemon, and then you may switch Gengar with one of your bench Pokemon. You're going to switch into Spirit Tomb, because Spirit Tomb, when it's active, provides Trainer Lock with its Keystone Seal. So just very, very good to be able to do that against Gyarados, because if you're attacking with Gardevoirs into Gyarados, you're just going to run out of Gardevoirs unless you're able to disrupt them significantly. So this is a good attack to use against Gyarados. I don't find myself using Shadow Skip as much as I'd like, just because usually I've won the game by the time I'm able to get this Gengar set up sometimes, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it is very good for retreat. This guy's great, hits the perfect numbers, everything we want. Gengar Level X adds an extra 30 HP to each of our Gengars, whichever one you choose. Level Down is why we play this card. Once during your turn, you may choose one of your Pokemon's Level X and remove that Level Up card and have them shuffle it into their deck. This is our way to deal with Floatzel. Even without the Gengar with the hit and run attack, we can actually combat Gyarados by hitting them with a Judge and then a Psychic Lock, turning off their powers, putting them to 4 cards in hand, and taking away their Floatzel. That way they don't get the Gyarados back immediately. So Level Down's pretty good. Even if you don't decide to run the Arceus Gengar near, you definitely want the Level X, because that's what fixes Gyarados for you. Just all kinds of other uses against SP as well. Really is annoying to deal with. Just really good power. And Compound Pain, occasionally useful. I haven't used it in this deck, though. 30 each, your opponent's Pokemon with any damage counters on it. It's not impossible that you would use this, so it's worth mentioning, but I've never used it in this specific deck. 1 copy of Azelf with Time Walk just allows us to check our prizes and grab a Pokemon there, and then replace that card with a card from our hand. Just really, really good. As you can see, we run a lot of one-of Pokemon. We have, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 one-of Pokemon besides Azelf. So just a lot of Pokemon can get prized. Things can get a little hairy. So Time Walk's good to have. And Lockup's not bad either. 20, defending Pokemon can't retreat. I haven't used it in this deck just because I've only put a couple games in with this deck. So the list is still in progress, by the way. I should mention that. But Lockup's pretty good against other, just all kinds of situations where you use Lockup to buy time. Great attack. For a liability, anyway. 1 copy of Baltoy. We are running the 1/1 Clay Doll, and this gives me a lot of anxiety. I'm not a fan of the 1/1 Clay Doll. But it's just, we had to cut somewhere, right? You have to cut somewhere for room. It's got Spinning Attack, 10, and Quick Turn, flip 2 coins, 20 for each heads, terrible attacks. You play this one because it is Psychic type, so it gets free retreat with our Stadium. Mainly play it for Clay Doll. Cosmic Power, you may choose up to 2 cards from your hand, put them on the bottom, and then draw until you have 6 in hand. Best support ability maybe ever printed, arguable with setup on Uxie and Shaman. Just an absolutely incredible card. 80 HP is a little low, obviously we're going to die to Garchomp, but we're going to make it difficult for our opponent in the meantime. Do have a 2 retreat cost, so this is a liability. Be careful not to get it trapped, because we don't have many cards to switch in this deck. Just be warned. We do have ways to move energy around, and we have double colorless though, so it's not impossible to get out of a trap. Nidoran Female has 60 HP. We play this because it has the Offer Help attack, which searches the deck for a supporter card, can occasionally be useful. And note that if you pay this with Psychic Energy, then you can always move the Psychic Energy off later with the Gardevoir, so it's not as bad as attaching it in a normal deck. If you could attach double colorless though, it's stuck here. We're mainly playing this for the Nidoqueen with Maternal Comfort. Remove 1 damage counter in between turns from each of your Pokemon. Notable that because it says at any time between turns, you can remove them before poison applies, meaning you can potentially save a knockout by removing the poison damage before it goes on. Again, so let's just say I'm 10 HP away from knockout. I'll heal, so I have then 20. Poison goes on, so I still have 10. So just a really good body, and that distinction is very relevant. Mega Punch is actually decent. 40 damage for 1 energy, not bad. And Ruthless Tail does 50 plus 10 for each of your opponent's benched Pokemon. Just a really solid attack. We don't play Dusknoir in this deck, so it's actually more effective than in typical Gardevoir lists, where your opponent's going to be playing under Dusknoir. But it's a pretty decent attack just for slugging, a little bit harder than the other Psychic types in this deck. You're going to be able to get up to 100 damage potentially, just off the base damage, which is pretty good. Because we don't play Dusknoir, it is relevant to say that your opponent, if they know you don't play Dusknoir, is going to obviously play a little bit more greedily. But in a closed deckless environment, I think this list is very fine not playing Dusknoir. If you're really worried, you could still put Dusknoir in there, but are you really going to put a 4th stage 2 line, right? Nidoqueen's the more important when you're playing Gardevoir. This is mainly a Gardevoir deck with Gengar as a side piece to help in matchups. So Nidoqueen's the more important one when you're playing Gardevoir. Dusknoir is most important when you're playing Gengar. 1 copy of Unknown G with the Guard Pokepower attaches itself to one of your Pokemon as a tool and prevents all effects of attacks done to the Pokemon that it's attached to. Really, really good just for keeping your opponent away from effects. The Shadow Room attack that we mentioned before is an effect, so if your opponent's trying to Shadow Room you, you can stop that. There's all kinds of effects with trapping. You a lot of times want to put this on your Claydol so it doesn't get trapped in the active spot by something like a Rose Raid. Preventing it from retreating, special conditions, energy moving with Ambipom G. There's all kinds of effects that this guy blocks. And 50 damage for 2 energy. Very conditional, but you can use it. If Unknown G has any damage counters on it, it does 10. Don't let that happen. But because you can move your energy around, it's actually not bad if you just start this to throw an attachment here and potentially move it off later. Though do be careful because it does discard all cards attached to it when it uses its power, so not your favorite attachment in the world. Next on to our supporters, we play 4 copies of Roseanne's Research. Search your deck for up to 2 in a combination of basic Pokemon and energy cards and show them to your opponent, put them into your hand. Just the best setup supporter for decks reliant on basic energy. Really, really strong, so we're going to need it. Notably, you can grab a Spiritomb and an energy, retreat into Spiritomb with that energy, and use Darkness Grace on Spiritomb to start setting up your board. So really good combo there with Roseanne's. We also play 4 Bebe Search. Choose a card from your hand, put it on top of your deck, search your deck for a Pokemon, and put it into your hand. So just really good Pokemon search. Seems really weak if you're playing nowadays. You're like, man, this card's good. Yes, it's one of the best supporters ever printed for its relative power at the time. Just incredible Pokemon search. Can play it under Spiritomb's Trainer Lock, which is also very relevant. That's why you don't want to max out on items. You want to max out on your supporters that search. 3 copies of Judge. This deck plays both Trainer Lockers and mainly our Power Locking strategy. So Judge is perfect in here. We want to put our opponent to a low hand size and frustrate them with our attacks. So really good. Definitely better than Looker. Do not play Looker. Looker puts your opponent to 5 or puts you to 5. You have to choose a player, so you can't draw with Judge and disrupt your opponent. Just forcing each player to shuffle draw 4 is always better. Pretty much almost always better in this format. 4 copies of Rare Candy. Because we play so many stage 2s, we got to play 4 copies of Rare Candy, of course. We do max out counts on this. In basically every Gardevoir deck these days, you max out counts. Curse Guard, you usually run 3 because of how heavy the Trainer Lock is. But in Gardevoir, getting a Gardevoir in early allows you to use Telepass to help set up as well. So never bad. We would play 5 candies if we could. Just a really good card. Moving on, we have Luxury Ball. Search your deck. I suppose I should explain. If you're new to this format, Candy can evolve a Stage 1 or Stage 2 Pokemon from the basic on the turn you play it. Notice that Stage 1, so I can play it on a Baltoy, use a Rare Candy, and in a Claydol on the turn I play it. Very good card. Just gets you going. Luxury Ball, search your deck for a Pokemon excluding level X and show it to your opponent, put it into your hand. You cannot play it if there's any Luxury Ball in your discard pile. That's why we run only 1 copy. It's just nice to have a little bit of search. Our deck isn't super reliant on level X's. We do only play 2, so I do recommend playing Luxury Ball. This is also the next card's an optional attack. I decided to put it back in after having some rough starts. We have Pokemon Communication. Choose a Pokemon from your hand, show it to your opponent, put it on top of your deck. If you do, search your deck for a Pokemon. Show it to your opponent, put it to your hand. So essentially just trade a Pokemon from your hand for one from your deck. Just a very solid Pokemon search. Again, both of these can't be used under Spiritom's Trainer Lock, but you do want some Pokemon search. I decided to put this back in because there's just a lot of games where I wish I just had one more Pokemon search, just from slow setups, like that game where I stalled 3 Hypnosis turns. I was just like, this deck wouldn't hurt having one more search card, so I decided to put Communication in. One copy of Night Maintenance. Search your discard for up to 3 in any combination of Pokemon and basic energy cards. Show them to your opponent and shuffle them into your deck. We do run 1 copy. Maybe you could argue 2. I know GGAMU a lot of times plays 2. Or a Palmer. I would not recommend Palmer in this deck, which shuffles 5 as a supporter. Night Maintenance is definitely better in this deck. But you could argue a second one with how many 1-ofs we have. I did have trouble. I almost lost a game the other day because I prized 5 energies. So it was very difficult once I lost a Gardevoir that had 3 energies attached to keep playing the game. But typically, because we're able to move our energies around with the Psychic Connect Gardevoir, if your board is set up, you really don't need Night Maintenance as much as a regular Gardevoir list does, because you'll just pivot in and out of attackers with energy. And even if your opponent takes out the damaged Pokemon on the bench with a Gust, that Pokemon won't have any energy on it. Besides double colorless energy, because you can't move that. 2 copies of Belt. Attach it to one of your Pokemon as a tool. That Pokemon gets plus 20 HP, plus 20 damage. Really good. But when knocked out, that Pokemon gives up an extra prize card. So this just increases our HP, makes our attackers more damaging. Notably increases Shadow Skip to do 80, knocking out basic SPs. If you use Level Down to level down a Pokemon SP, it will usually have 80 HP. Garchomp, Luxray, etc. have 80 HP, so you'll knock them out with Shadow Skip. Same thing with Psychic Lock, you can do 80, and if you have a level down on your bench, you can level them down and do 80, taking the knockout on most SP Pokemon that way. 80 is really the gold number that you want to hit. It's also really good in the mirror, because if you hit 80 with your Psychic Lock, you will be able to do 110 with weakness to opposing Gardevoir. And because we have Gengar here, we can shuffle in their Azelf that takes away Psychic weakness on their side and take the knockout with a Psychic Lock. Just be careful, because the extra prize can lose you the game. 2 copies of Moonlight Stadium. Gives Dark and Psychic Pokemon for your treat. There's just no question you're absolutely playing this. You could argue for a 3rd copy, there's just no room. Same thing with Belt. You can always argue for a 3rd copy, but there's just no room to almost ever put a 3rd copy of Belt in your deck. 2 Moonlight's generally fine against SP. You can win the Stadium War as long as you play against Algachomp. If you play on the defensive and wait for them to play their Stadium. Sometimes they'll never play it until you play yours just to get rid of your Moonlights. But just for your treat's good, especially in a deck with a lot of moving pieces. 7 Psychics. I decided to go up to 7 after prizing 3 Psychics and having a really hard time attacking when I lost my 3 Psychics with that Gardevoir. So 7 it is. You could potentially go up or down. I think 7's pretty good. It's what GGAMU typically runs, so we're on the same train of thought in that regard. Being able to move them around does mean we are less worried about losing energy as long as we have an okay board established. And finally, 4 copies of Double Colorless Energy. Provides 2 colorless, and obviously is pretty good at powering up our Psychic Lock. I was playing 3 copies of this, but I just felt that you always lead Gardevoir. Even if you get Gengar into play in the latter half of the game, you're always leading Gardevoir, so just being able to get that aggressive Psychic Lock, being able to commit less Psychic Energy to a Pokemon as well is just really good. You don't want to commit those single attachments to a Pokemon that's going to go down. You don't mind giving up 1, but you don't want to give up like 3, if, for instance, on like a Gallade. So DC just really helps keep your board in maintenance and gives you more turns to attach the Psychic Energy to save for later. This is my list inspired by James G's builds, which obviously were inspired, I believe, by Jay Hornung's Gardevoir list, which kind of revolutionized the format. Obviously, it's missing Dusknoir, it's missing Azelf level X, as we talked about, but it does make up for it. I think this deck is probably tier 2. It doesn't seem to function as well as Gardevoir because it's just not as consistent, and Cursegar is, in my opinion, just one of the absolute best decks of the format. And this isn't playing as much into that aspect. But this deck does have unique advantages over the other two. I think it's fine into any top deck, or fine playing into any top deck, just because it has the same tools as those decks. It has a little bit, obviously, of worse matchups into the matchups like Gardevoir Excel decks. You're not playing fully into Gardevoir, and it doesn't do the trainer locking as well as Cursegar, so you're just kind of a user of all, master of none. But it works pretty well, and it can beat Gyarados, can beat SP, all these decks. It just gives it a little bit more match percentages in some for percentages in others by including the Gengar package. This is kind of a Darkrai Mewtwo-esque deck. It's not very creative from me, but I was just testing with it because I was like, why not? By Darkrai Mewtwo, I'm referring to the 2012 deck that won the World Championships. I believe took all 4 top spots at Worlds. Which is just people realize that putting Darkrai EX, the best EX attacker, and Mewtwo EX, the other best EX attacker, together, just put really good card with really good card, and sometimes you don't even have to think about it, and it's just good. Obviously, there's a little bit more to think about here with different split lines and Gengar and all that, but it is a similar concept of just good card plus good card make good deck. Moving on, I'm going to talk about the second version of this deck. I'll just talk about the changes. I did this on the recommendation from my friend Nolo, who just really thought I needed Azelf in the deck. So if you want to play Azelf in your deck, we have a second version here. And essentially what it does is it drops the Gengar line down significantly. You can see we caught the Haunter, we also caught this Gengar, and a Ghastly. So we're down to a 101 with a level X. This is the more impactful Gengar most of the time, just because it's cheap to pay for. You can get it in early as an attacker, and it's annoying for a lot of decks while keeping that bench disruption, so you do have to play this one. You do give up your trainer lock strat, but it's decent to have this guy around. And it is hard to get Gengar into play with this kind of strategy. I haven't tested this list, but it is essentially it's going to be hard to get Gengar into play that way. We do play Azelf, which removes Psychic Weakness, as I said before, so really good just to take away Gardevoir's weakness to Psychic, which is just its main inhibiting factor. If we're not playing the Gengar from Arceus, we do have to worry a lot more about Psychic Weakness, since all of our major attackers are going to be weak to Psychic. I don't consider this guy a major attacker because he's not going to be able to carry most games. Sorry, buddy. But also has Deep Balance. Choose one of your opponent's Pokemon. Put 1 damage counter on that Pokemon for each energy attached to all of your opponent's Pokemon. So it does work well with Gengar from Stormfront for adding some added snipe damage to the deck. Really a tough attack to play around in a lot of matchups. The other thing I added to this list is I thickened the Baltoy Claydol line. That was the first thing I was going to do. The second there's any room in the deck, I was going to make it a 2-2 line. Because 1-1 line just makes me really uncomfortable. I may end up eventually coming to the conclusion and just finding some way, somehow with the original list to fit a 2-2 line. Because I'm just not a fan of the 1-1 line. It feels like you prize pieces too often, and using an Azelf to pick out in like a not essential piece of your prizes doesn't feel great, because you're also giving up a bench spot with Azelf. So just being able to run a 2-2 line is just, it is a nice breath of fresh air. But essentially the same concept, just doesn't have the trainer lock strat. I think you do give up a bit more percentage to Gyarados in that regard, though you're going to run a little bit more consistently as Gardevoir. If you want, you could definitely also just remove this Gardevoir right here in this version and just go 3. That would definitely be a better solution. In that case, you could also cut Curlia. There's a little bit you could do around with this deck, like let's just say boop into that, drop that, and you have room for another card, right? I'm not going to decide what that card is. You could maybe even fit a Dusknoir line somehow. But this is just another way to play the deck if you really want Azelf to mitigate that weakness. And if you, like me, you really want your 2-2 Claydol line, so you can play the game. Anyway, that's been Gardevoir, Gengar. This is the list I'm working with right now. It's still a work in progress. I've only put in a couple games with the deck, but I figured I'd share the concept because I need a video that's not going to take much time to edit because I'm in my finals season, so yay. Give the list a try. Maybe you want to make some changes to it. I know TCG1 doesn't have 2010, so you can't test this affordably. It is a very expensive list, having two expensive attackers, but maybe you just have the pieces laying around already from these two decks. Doesn't use anything unique in it. If you have GGAMU and Gengar built, you can build this. Give it a try. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.